Hi everybody, welcome back. So what we're going to do today, this is for my environment sketching class. I have some wonderful silhouettes right here from one of my students, Maria Jaramillo Ramirez, and we're going to be taking a look at them. And we're going to be going through them. She did a really great job here figuring out some building shapes. And what I did is I'm going to copy and paste them into a secondary page and merge them all together, because there are a couple different things that I want you guys to learn in environment sketching. And one of the first things is how important the use of silhouette shapes are, especially when they start overlapping other elements. And a lot of times what's really cool about working digitally is we can create things that we weren't really thinking about, because we have a series of layers and we can overlap things digitally and come up with new ideas. So what I'm doing here, I'm just grabbing a couple elements, I'm trying to separate them, and I'm just going to copy and paste them over. I'm going to transform them, squash them, see if it looks like a new structure, just like this example right here. And it's pretty cool because you can come up with something that you normally just don't think of. So there's a huge importance of you just having fun and making the silhouette and really thinking about shape language and the visual read that's happening inside your design. But at the same time, there's this thing of like happy accidents. And any of you that have ever worked in a traditional manner would know what I'm talking about. And that's when you might accidentally, like if you're doing a sketch and you have watercolor out and you touch your sketch and you hit part of it and then you change part of it by accident that you did not mean to change, and you get this really cool look, and that's a happy accident, right? So the same thing can happen in Photoshop, where we're taking elements that we've never really thought about meshing together before, and we start to overlap them and combine them, and we see what kind of new shapes that we come up with. And I love to do this because it's something else that allows my brain to expand and think about, you know, a new approach or a new way of designing something that I didn't think about before. Okay, so I'm trying to just grab some of these. I'm going to move them over. I want to make some space in here. And I already like the three that we have up on top, sort of group them together in larger clumps. And just let me grab these over. Let me see if I can duplicate this guy. And what's really cool, you can erase parts of it. You know, like you see little niches, like the angle of that roof, so it's not a tangency. And then I could, you know, go in there, fill some more some black in the bottom to sort of unite them together like they're on a solid base. Okay, so I got to hand it off to Maria. Maria, these are really nice thumbnails. You did a great job, and I know you might think otherwise, but and you might think otherwise because maybe you have another page or two coming out of you, which is fine. And you know, this is a great starting point, and that's cool. I like that angled roof that you have in there. I think it works really nice. I think there's a lot you can do with that. And now I'm going to use the warp tool here, which is another great transformation tool in Photoshop. It really has some cool effects to it, and there's a lot of things you can use to your advantage. And I'm going to try to warp some of these. Sorry, oops, I accidentally filled my layer there. So I'm going to come in here, creating some of a base there. Then I was trying to warp them to get a little bit more of a bend or a gesture. It's a great tool. I wish they had some more tools that are similar to the warp tool, maybe like a warp and perspective tool in Photoshop would be really cool and would sort of come together. I know they have the separate distort and perspective tool, but you know, it'd just be cool if you had a couple options. One thing that would be really cool in Photoshop when you're selecting things is after you rotate something, if you can adjust the axes of the rotation, because then what happens if you've rotated something, you go back and hit transform, it goes back to a standard axis, and I wish it would stay with the object being rotated, because that way I'm bending something or turning it a certain way, and it'd be a lot easier to work like that. So trying to just move a couple other images over here and just create a little bit more interest and push some of these. This is great right here. Look at that. I love the hanging clothes right there. Wonderful little silhouette study. So I'm going to copy and paste that and use that in a couple other places. Look, I can throw it right in there. I flipped it horizontally the other way to get it to fit in, and I think that was pretty neat. It's a good idea. Let me move this up out of the way real quick. Merge a couple of my layers together. And take that part. See if I can't copy and paste this and stretch it. Maybe put it back in there. It's a nice little cornice. There, I'm going to just take my marquee, hold down shift, throw in some more black on top of it so it looks like another part of a building structure. And then take my eraser tip, sort of erase over the edges a little bit so it doesn't feel like it's such a hard 90-degree angle. And that way just add something on there. Okay, so that's pretty cool. I mean, I've only spent in class, I think I'm about, 6 minutes into this. And just 6 minutes into this, I'm ready to get in there and just really mess and change with some of the silhouettes and the overall language that's happening and come up with another idea that I probably wouldn't have thought of. So really cool. I like this one here because I like the rock and like the dirt you put in there. That was a great idea. Okay, give me a minute. Sorry, I was having sometimes when I'm working, I've noticed lately the recorder eats up a lot of memory, and sometimes it makes Photoshop work a little funky. So I think I was having a little bit of a problem right there. Let me just move these over in the center of the page, and let me move these real quick over a teeny bit and get these other ones to sort of fit in here nicely. There we go. Okay. So lesson number 1 for today is look at the cool silhouette shapes that I created just by messing around and taking what already had existed, and it's just going from here. These were much more single structures, and by meshing some of those together, I ended up with a lot more wider sort of town feel silhouette shapes, which is cool. I accidentally deleted that guy from mine, so I wanted to take him, put him back in here. I really like that shape a lot. Could blend in there, but let me see. And move this guy over a teeny bit. Yeah, so it's cool. I like some of those variations. They make it look like a little bit larger of a cityscape. That's a great silhouette there. Let me see if I can just combine one. Maybe I could flip it, get it to blend in, make it a little bit smaller, wider. Maybe erase part of that. Oh, that's nice, right? Simple, it's easy. Looks like a wider house on the side. Could be like a barn or another structure. Then you have the main structure sitting right next to it. Pretty cool. All right, so there we are. It's about 8 minutes into it, and I like the outcome already. It just gives me another variation. So I mean, come on, what's 10 minutes of time? It's really nothing to just sit there and have fun, take some silhouettes, and move them around. Okay. So now what we're going to do is part 2 of today's lecture. Is I want to show you guys what you can do in 1-point perspective by taking a silhouette that you like and framing up a low horizon line. Okay, and placing your silhouette sort of on that low horizon line and building up off of that. So after you get your horizon line placed in and you have a frame, we always have to have a frame. That's mandatory, because if we don't have a frame, we don't have a sense, we lose the sensibility of knowing where our foreground is and where other parts of the composition are. And then without that frame, we sort of end up scattered all over the place. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the silhouette, keep it down really low on the horizon line, put one vanishing point in here. And this is a great little trick you can do. And you can take your silhouette, I lower the opacity, and now I'm going to go in and just draw on top of the silhouette. And I'm going to put in detail. I'm going to put in detail about the house structure. I'm going to think about maybe the lower part of it is like on a heavy foundation of blocks. Maybe there's like some wood paneling. So we already took a look at the reference a little bit earlier, and we in class we talked about our visual identifiers and parts of our reference that were working for us and giving us a direction to move in towards. And so that's stuck in the back of my brain, and I'm thinking about, the wood against plaster and large stone and rock and foundation. Foundation was huge. I mean, all houses are built upon it. And then I'm just going to come in here and just see if I can't add a couple other little elements just to pull out a little bit more information here. Okay. So what's really cool about doing this is that I can do it over and over. And then what I'm going to do with my vanishing point right here, I'm going to start to bring the side structure of the house towards that vanishing point. So that way I'm matching it up in perspective. So I can have the right flat side, and then I have the left side, which is converging back to the vanishing point, following the rules of perspective. I'm going to add maybe a little chimney here. Now I'm just, I'm doing this really quick. So I look back at it now when I'm voicing over, and I'm like, the chimney's out of perspective. Okay, for a quick lecture, I'm not going to be that picky on it, but if it was studio work, I would make sure everything was accurate and I was totally on top of it. All right, and I'm just gonna, continue in here, put little details, and there is something that does happen to part of your silhouette and your shape language, is that it does change because you're adding a side view to it. That's going to be common. But there's a benefit to that because you can still retain part of the original silhouette that's in your design. And you're not just starting from nowhere in your design. You actually have a base silhouette that's there and you're building up on top of it. And that's the importance of understanding silhouette shapes and visual reads, like the worst thing you could do is open up a sketchbook and start drawing and you have no point of direction in your sketchbook. And so that's how we don't want to work, and by gathering our reference, by going through it, by looking at the building structures, the materials that they're made out of, looking at the time period, what kind of roof material, what kind of local forged materials might have been available, and you add those elements into part of your structure, and voila, it starts to come alive and it starts to work really well, and you get something that looks cool. So now what I'm going to do is I have a different silhouette here, and I'm just going to draw on top of that too. I'm just going to quickly go over it and add in some little details. So your silhouette design that you create, it's your template and it's your guide, and it's a starting point, and if you are working on it and you feel like you want to jump away from it because you have a better idea, that's totally fine. It's not a lock-in point. This is just something that I cover in class to give students a better idea on how to work and how to construct environments. Okay, and it works. So matching up, I did put that vanishing point a little too close, but that's all right for right now. It's going to have a little bit more of an angle. It's right on that lower right-hand corner of the building there, so it's a little close. But you know what? That's okay because you have buildings that are always all over the place, and some might be right on top of the vanishing point in one point perspective shot, and sometimes, some might be turned at an opposite angle. Okay. All right. Oops. Sorry, my ruler slipped on my Cintiq there. So I'm just going to hold shift and get some nice straight lines in there. Sometimes I draw with the ruler quite a bit out of habit because that's how I learned to draw traditionally in animation. And so it's easy for me to put that ruler up, but then sometimes I don't realize I have my Cintiq slightly tilted at a 5-degree angle and I have my ruler tilted. And then when I go to turn it back down, I'm like, uh-oh, my lines just came out with a 15-degree or 12-degree angle on them and they don't really look right. So that's fine. So let me just put some other little detail in here. When it comes to detail, I like to think of roofing, I think of tile, I think of edging, especially with medieval houses and English time period houses, and then especially when you take a look at England, you start looking at European, and then you have everything from old French houses and the houses in Belgium and just all over Europe. There's a certain feel to them, and they you're talking about people and cultures that like to decorate things, and they had different sized windows and they had wood panelings. I mean, I have this one book on German Alpine homes. Oh my God, it's the best book I've ever owned, and it has this beautiful, just these alpine-based homes in the mountains up, all over Germany, and they're just gorgeous, and just the woodwork, the detail, it's really cool. So there's my secondary sketch. Now what I can do, what's really cool, is you see this one that I already created. they're on the same horizon line. So all I have to do is slide one left, slide one right, and match up the vanishing points, and boom, the perspective is spot on. I hope that makes sense. So look, that's the original drawing based off that silhouette. And then let's come over here and we'll take my new drawing. Look, so that's my stepping stone and work process. Is I use my silhouette to guide me through part of my drawing, and that's huge, right? It's going to save me a tremendous amount of time. And look at that. I have two cool structures that work pretty well together, and right there I moved it over and I lined up the vanishing point right there in the middle. So both those buildings, even though drawn separately, they're on the same horizon line. In one point, I can slide them left to right as long as I match up the vanishing points correctly, and it works. It totally works. So now what we're going to do next is the next part of this lecture is to talk about filler. And what filler is inside environment design is all the stuff that's around our little world that exists. Okay, hold on a second here. Let me go back here and trying to remember. Oh, I went back here and I was going to copy and paste one of these and put it in the back in a minute. There. Okay. Because what I wanted to show people, students real quick, is I can even lighten this and scale it down. You see I can put it back on the horizon line, and it looks like more of the city in the back. And that's really cool, too. So I could trace over that and instantly draw, the graphic silhouettes of another part of the city much further back in the depth relationship to what's in the midground and foreground. And it saves me a ton of time. Right? It's a great way to work. And if you know how to use custom shapes in Photoshop, you can take that, turn it into a custom shape, and then when you're painting in a more traditional manner set where you're not doing linear compositions, you can throw that right in and create a composition in a matter of minutes. God, I would love to do a whole video series on that. That's a great way to learn, and I've learned that from a couple different people that I've worked with and been around, and it's really neat. It's really cool. So anyway, let's go back here. So I could do that at any time. Let's start talking about filler. And let me get all my layers set up here. Sorry. Sometimes when I'm talking, I get a little, forget what layer I'm on. And, okay. So first thing I'm going to do, before I put my filler in, is I'm going to come here off my vanishing point on a separate layer. I'm going to create a base grid. My base grid is super duper important because that grid, it's going to allow me to create depth inside my piece. However, though, I'm going to go back in here right now and I'm going to turn down the opacity setting on it and make it really, really, really light. Okay, so without that grid, I just have an empty white space, and it's really hard to sort of visualize the changeovers. With my grid, it makes it 20 times easier for me to do a couple really simple practices. Number one, it allows me to see foreground, midground, and background. Number two, it allows me to draw objects and see where they connect onto the ground plane. Number three, when it comes to drawing trees and certain other little shapes, it's always better to start from the ground plane and draw upward. It saves you a tremendous amount of time when organics and other elements are anchored to the ground. It really does, and it gives you a great feel to the overall piece in the sketch. So all I'm doing here is I'm rough sketching in now, blocking in filler. I got to think about, I have hills in the foreground. I'm going to have some dirt. And I'm going to have some dirt. I'm going to have some rocks. Just this is where you have to go back and you think about what can you have for filler, and that's what's really cool. That goes back to your reference, and that's why reference is so important. So, I could look at different trees that I might have in here. I could have rocks, stones. I could have signage. I could have fences. I can have carts. I could have a little shop front. There could be an old man sitting out here selling like chicken eggs and bread that he's made, right? That would happen in an old medieval town period. Absolutely it would. So, I forgot why I erased that. I was working on it and I liked it. And, I wanted to show the transfer of scale. We were talking about this in perspective. I wanted to explain somebody's height being back on the doorstep here and what would their height look like closer towards me. So if I get a better idea of their height being transferred correctly in perspective, now I can make a door front up here. So before I had a tree in there, and if I don't want to put a tree in here, I can put a structure in here. I can put another house in the foreground with a roof, and I can put some other details on there, right? Absolutely. And this is a great thing about sort of this approach that I really like to do is that you have an area of interest in your thumbnail already. Now I'm coming back in my thumbnail and I can do multiple versions on top of my silhouettes and come up with all different types of design ideas. And it's great. I mean, that's a real cool part of drawing. Look at that. I mean, I already have, something that's working here in my composition. I can create more depth in this in just a second by, I can go back in here, place some hills, mountains, and like I said before, look, I can place another silhouette back here and I could trace over it, squash it, and make it look like there's a bunch of other structures in the back there, right? Okay, before I do that though, it's still sort of a flat composition, so I want to put some trees and bushes in the back and make it look like it's a real place. And then I want to get in there and put some rolling hills in there, so there's a little bit of overlap. So again, back to that magic word that I just did over the winter session break. Did a couple demos. I'll be putting them up on YouTube soon on overlap, on trying to explain to early artists the importance of using overlap to basically draw and place elements in front of each other, and overlapping in size arrangement, and by size arrangement, and B, by creating scale and transfer of scale, which creates depth. And then also, when you overlap other objects in front of each other, it's a way to establish grouping inside a composition. So it's huge. It's a really, really important thing to do. So, you know what? I put that in there, and I wanted to sketch to show you it could be in there, but now I sort of zoom out of my piece. I had some clouds in, and to be honest with you, I don't like that in there. It could be back in there in a painting, but I don't. The silhouette has a little bit more detail back there, so it's all right. I like my buildings on the side, but I'm probably going to take it out for right now. But I just wanted to show that it's really easy to do because I already have part of the silhouettes that exist. Okay, let me put another bit of maybe there's another hill here, something else that ties into it, sways, and that's good for now. That's, as far as thumbnailing goes, that's a real simple thumbnail. Boom, I'm done. I can look at this composition, I can show it to a director, a storyboard supervisor, and be like, what do you think? So again, I'm at the whole, that took me 10 minutes to do the thumbnail, and it took me 10 minutes to mess with the shapes. That's great. That's what you want to do. You want to keep your thumbnails into that. Now, as a new student, you might be, in more of the 15 or 20 minute area. That's fine. Even if you're doing 30-minute thumbnails, I guarantee you, if you do 10, 30-minute thumbnails, and it takes you 3 hours or so to do, I promise you, your next 11th thumbnail is going to be shorter in time, and you're going to get faster and faster at it. So on this idea for my filler, I thought about raising the structures up. So if I have the structures raised with more of a base, this was really common sometimes because you had a lot of rain. The rain would turn things into mud, and if structures were elevated, obviously it kept the mud off parts of the area, and the foundation around the house would stay nice and dry, right? Excuse me, I'm losing my voice a little bit. And so here, just wanted to throw, I don't know what that, don't ask me why I threw that little weird melted hill shape in the back there, because I'm looking at it now and I'm like, I really don't like it. It's okay, but it's not my favorite shape. So I might take that out in a minute here. But look, just in a matter of minutes, I've started creating a whole nother composition with my current building shapes and just replacing my filler on another sketch here. Okay, so the filler is just all the other stuff that supports part of your composition that's sitting around here. Might have some other trees, bushes, it could be a little mountain there, it could be some rocks that connect through, there could be a walkway here, you could have different kinds of paving stones, there could be a grass hill, there could be trees, flowers, weeds, bushes on top, and those are actually known as directional lines that can help point me back in a part of my composition. They're also used to help show scale, so the closer to the viewer, the larger they are. There could be a tree here, and I could have some leaves overlapping, some vines, depending on what kind of tree it is. I'm going to put in here some other elements back in some other, sort of bring a little bit more of that roadway towards me. And then what I was talking about really quick a couple minutes ago is that why not throw a cart? Like, what if I put something right in the foreground right here? I can do that. I can erase part of this, overlap it, maybe have a little sign right here in the front. welcome, or who knows what's on the sign, right? So I could take the sign off. Maybe I want to go in there, put, you know, some boxes, whatever. It's free reign. You can do whatever you want to do. It's based off a part of your imagination. So now what I'm thinking about doing is erasing and putting in some old like wooden posts. So, you know, a lot of times there could be posts set up or out of wood to keep cattle or sheep in, or it might be a directional way to keep you on a road from going down, you know, going onto a muddy hill or something. So by sketching some of these posts in here really quick, what's really cool, if you look at my frame, it acts as a really nice foreground element, number one, that's in the dedicated foreground, right? Number two, there's a little bit of transfer of scale happening inside that post, going, you know, getting a little bit smaller, and it acts as a directional line, points you back into part of the composition, right? So it's cool. That's, you know, that's a neat little element that I could put in that's doesn't take a lot of time, and it's just sketching in really quick too. The other thing I like is I angled my post a little bit to give it a little bit more character, to have it offset a little bit. You know, it's cool, right? Okay. What else? Oh yeah, maybe some stairs over here, connected to the side. A rock or two, right? Stuff rolls down hills. It gathers. You have large against small. You have groupings of stone, all kinds of stuff. Put some bushes and trees in the back here. Okay. And that's it. Now, let me come back in here. Let me add a couple elements. And this time I'm thinking of just starting off with a cart in the front. And a cart is a good prop to have because, number one, they were used quite often in this time period. So if you can see what I did, I already drew a box in there, and I'm always starting with, because I've learned the hard way, you always start with the axle on the cart, because the axle has to go through the radius of the wheel, and it has to look right. And if it's not right, the cart itself will not set. How do I say this? The cart itself sets on the axle, just like a vehicle does, right? Right. So that means I have to have the wheel in there, and I have to figure out the axle's coming through and make sure the cart is slightly above that and it's making sense, right? A lot of times I have students draw a cart and there's no axle on it, or the axle would go through the middle of the cart. You wouldn't be able to put anything inside, so it's sort of pointless. So it's sort of thinking about physics and what you're drawing and making it make sense. Now, I'm doing this cart very meticulous in terms of it's going back to the vanishing point just to keep it locked up in perspective. Now, if I was doing this for a studio sketch, I think it would be a better idea to maybe sketch the cart slightly turned, because it might be a little bit more inviting in 2-point, having the rest of the drawing in 1-point. But, you know, that's all right for right now. It's just a quick demo. It's putting some bags of like grain in the back of it, and I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to paint white over this so you can see the detail of the cart and get rid of all this detail in the back here, because that's on a separate layer. And then after I paint that in there, I'm going to draw some of the wood pieces in there, because that's important to me. And you see that? It just gets rid of some of that extra detail that isn't really needed in there and allows you to see the cart a little bit more. Put a couple little lines across, indicate the wood, and a couple more bags of hay or whatnot, you know, and grain in there. And then sort of clean this up a little bit. Put another little edge so you see the side of that 2x4. Another couple pieces, and voila, there's part of my base cart. Okay, so what I'm going to do next, I'm going to draw something over on the left-hand side, and then at the very end, I'm going to come back and put just a little bit of light tone underneath, so the cart and the other foreground element totally separate themselves from what's happening in part of the back. Okay, so here, I was just thinking of some simple boxes, so I'm just going to sketch from the ground up and to start drawing. You know, I did think about having something like elevated work table, but it gets a little too complicated. It's just simple. It's a busy town, and they're moving stuff in, and there's people bringing goods in. Maybe they unloaded some element, so Just going to start with a simple box, bring that back to the vanishing point, boom, done. Stack another box up on top of this one, obviously different size. Okay, maybe another one on top of that one, and erase part of the overlap here. Look what that does for depth right there. I mean, that right there is the power of overlap in just a second, you know. Boom, it's there. Simple, it's easy. And put some wood trim on my box. Make it match part of that time period. Yeah, wood trim, wood boxes, wood crates. A lot of things were made out of, were made out of the natural supplies that existed in the forest around you, right? So, draped a little sheet on the top. Let me put a couple little, the edging in there. See little pieces of wood, the slats of wood nailed together. And then I'm thinking maybe like some spice bowls. You know, like down here, one sort of turned at a little bit of an angle here. So I got a spice bowl here. You know, because spices were huge, right? You'd sell salt and pepper and spices that came from other countries. I mean, that was huge in making food taste good. So maybe these were all delivered, right? All right, I'm going to come over here. Just put like a support beam or structure. So I'm just going to raise it up a little bit higher, make it go above. I'm going to put a little edge detail strap there, another one up above it. Make sure I can raise the roof line just a little bit higher so it's not interfering with part of the building silhouette. I'm going to keep it at a little bit of an angle. I'm going to match up those slats back to the vanishing point to make sure they're correct. So when I'm doing this, by the way, this is one of the benefits of, I'm doing this digital because it makes it easier for the demo in class because it's showing up on the monitors, right? Okay. However, though, there is something in traditional sketching and drawing that is of massive importance, and that is using a ruler for plotting points. When you have to plot like those slats I just did there, and I'm matching those back to the vanishing point, after you do a couple hundred sketches and you're plotting points, your brain sort of knows where the correct vanishing points are, and it knows how to make things look correct and right. So there's a huge importance in not just working digitally, but having a sketchbook, being in your sketchbook, and drawing environments, just freehanding with horizon lines at different level, and just getting in there and sketching. You know, that's huge. So here I'm just blocking in this little bit in tone, and then I'll lighten the tone. And you can see what happens once this is completely covered. It really creates a lot of separate in the piece. And look at the depth that's in there, right? I mean, it's cool. I mean, this is my third example on adding filler to part of a composition. And a great example at ending up at the use of overlap, you know. And look, I could even put back the old set I had there before, and it works. The old sketch totally works. It all comes together. So sometimes when you're doing your work, you can think of doing it in these parts, right? We started with silhouettes. We took our silhouettes, we'd put them on a horizon line, we had it framed, we drew the perspective. After the perspective was done, you know, we came back into our piece, we did this block in right here, then we added in other elements, foreground elements in front of there. So just because we did some filler doesn't mean we can't come back and do more, right? So the only concern that I would have in this piece would be, if it was for an animated show, what is happening in terms of the pathway of animation, where is the animation taking place. Obviously you want to set part of your environment and your design based around that. For right now, this is just a demo in class on how to think about using elements correctly. And since it is one point perspective, I can take my little wagon here and I can slide it to the side, and I could cheat it a little bit and pull it a little bit away from my vanishing point if I want. Okay? All right. So look at where we started with, right? That's what we had. I mean, it's just empty, right? Nothing's there. So we put some foreground elements in. Look, even if I wanted to leave one building to the side, I could just come back in on another layer, and just with 4 or 5 lines, I can add a hill or mountain in the back, and it's done. So as I come in here, I can just leave the one building here, extend the hill over, keep it simple, keep it easy. That's it. Finished. Done. It's another variation, right? Have fun, guys. Keep on drawing. Throw the cloud in. Voila.